Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we're going to be talking about a relatively mundane ship. It doesn't have a very inspired design, it's boxy and economical. As a matter of fact, it's probably one of the most boring ships in the hyperspace lanes. We of course are talking about the Gozanti Class cruiser from Gallifrey Yards. This relatively common ship might not seem very impressive. It's not going to be on any YouTuber's top 10 list for combat abilities. But in many ways, this was the most important ship in the galaxy, and it kept the Republic and later on the Galactic Empire functional. So what made the Gozanti Class cruiser so important? Even during the golden age of the Republic or the High Republic period, the galaxy was still a relatively dangerous place to live in. Because no matter how large and encompassing the central galactic government was, it lacked the political and economic ability to really properly patrol and secure every system. The Republic would attempt to control the galaxy through every means: a powerful federal military, economic expansion, subsidies, along with funding for local and systems defense forces. The Empire would try to control everything through just massively expanding the Imperial military and military-industrial complex. But even their massive navy was probably only a few times larger than the biggest old Republic navies, and still very incapable of securing every corner of the Empire. And so in the far reaches of the Outer Rim, or in wild space, or on the edges of the unknown region, it was extremely difficult to get regular shipments of just basic goods. This wasn't only because hyperspace lanes themselves were shaky and not very well established, it was also because in these less populated areas, you usually had the presence of gangs and other individuals willing to take advantage of the lack of law and order. It was with these hyperspace lanes in mind that the Gozanti Class cruiser was designed and built. The Gozanti Class cruiser was a product of Corellian Engineering Corporation. Headquartered on the famous world of Corellia, home of the massive sprawling industrial wasteland populated by wretched street urchins and migrant workers. It was a tough place to make a living, but such toughness crafted some of the finest and most durable ships in the entire galaxy. Now, Corellian ships didn't look pretty. If a ship looked like a flying box of some kind, it was most likely Corellian. Some examples of their previous work would be the famous YT-1300F freighter, aka the Millennium Falcon, the CR-90 Corvette, aka the diplomatic blockade runner known as the Tantive 4, and of course, the Sphearna class Hammerhead Corvette, forever immortalized by the Light Runner's epic ramming attack. But CEC was facing some pretty big political and consumer backlash. Like Toyota, their mid-sized pickup truck kept on getting stolen by terrorists and used in crimes against humanity. I mean, is it really CEC's fault that the rebels preferred to use their Corvettes as escort ships? Is it really Corellian Engineering Corporation's fault that smugglers and pirates like to trick out their basic freighters to the point where they can outgun and outrun security vessels? Well, it's no more CEC's fault than it is Toyota's fault that the preferred fighting vehicle of the Afghan Mujahideen or ISIS fighter is the Toyota Hilux. And although we might have ideological, religious, and cultural differences with these individuals, we are all united by the fact that Toyota makes very reliable pickup trucks. And the Gozanti Class cruiser was very similar in this way in how it was represented across the entire galaxy. Now, one of the things that made the Gozanti Class cruiser special was it was designed with a very specific set of speed and performance restrictions in response to complaints that so many of Corellian Engineering Corporation's other ships were being used for illegal activity. This was mainly done to meet the very strict standards that Republic regulators were now putting on ships of this class. Also, Corellian Engineering Corporation would go one step further by leasing out this design to a smaller third-party independent shipyard known as Gallifrey Shipyards Incorporated. And while these ships were relatively slow at sublight speeds, it still had a Class 3 hyperdrive which allowed it to plow its way at reasonable speeds through the hyperspace lanes. Now, what made this ship slow was not that its three engines were so weak, it was that the ship itself was extremely dense and heavy, especially for its size and class. At around 63.8 meters in length, the Gozanti Class cruiser was about as long as 5 X-Wings, stacked end to end, or about half the length of a Sphearna class Hammerhead Corvette. This made this ship a lot larger than your average freighter, but still small enough that a small independent contractor or some small world could still afford to hire this ship so it could service some of the more, sparsely populated areas of the galaxy. And where the ship lacked in speed and acceleration, it more than made up for it with an impressive internal storage capacity of 75 metric tons. It also had a surprisingly well-armored hull that came standard. The Gozanti Class cruiser was known to be very difficult to board, making it a favorite amongst merchants plying the more dangerous trade routes in the galaxy. One of the reasons why it was so difficult to board was because the armor on the hull again was so thick that it was pretty hard to breach even with the largest explosive charges. Also, the base version of the Gozanti Class cruiser came pretty well armed. It included 4 retractable heavy laser cannons, 2 retractable quad laser cannon turrets, and a proton torpedo launcher. This means that a properly crewed Gozanti could face up to a squadron of starfighters and still live to tell the tale. For many independent contractors out there, the Gozanti Class cruiser represented something that gave them peace of mind. It was basically a small, flying mini fortress. And so the Gozanti Class cruiser would be a common sight in the shipping lanes of the galaxy. It would decrease the cost of goods on dangerous routes because there's a higher chance of survival with this specific type of ship. And encounter raiders now didn't mean you were losing an entire ship crew and supplies. Instead, it just meant that you had to clean off some carbon scoring once the ship reached its destination. And so the Gozanti Class cruiser provided stable, reliable transportation when the infrastructure was not up to speed in certain parts of the galaxy. And so really the expansion of the Republic was done on the backs of these very hard-working ships. It should be noted that there was a special variant of the Gozanti Class cruiser that was very popular amongst merchants. It was known as the C-ROC. C-ROC stood for Configuration Restored Operational Capacity Upgrade. This is actually a package that you can install on your standard Gozanti at a third-party workshop. In the same way that Ford sends their Mustangs to Shelby to get that really nice upgrade, except this is probably less exciting. The C-ROC upgrade was designed to reinvigorate aging Gozanti Class cruisers in the wild. First, the entire hull was made larger and rounder to increase cargo capacity. The hull's sloping nature and the reinforcement inside to the armor meant that this version of the Gozanti Class cruiser was even more durable. These ships now also had port and starboard side docking bays for modular cargo containers. This allowed the ship to quickly unload and load cargo pods, and it also allowed them to carry more cargo pods. The 2 fin-mounted Gyrodyne TER-58 ion engines were replaced with 5 Novaldex JV-90 ion drives, which were more efficient and powerful. This greatly increased the sublight speed of the ship, which made it a much more attractive type of ship for merchants and criminals alike. The only trade-off is that the ordnance launcher was removed and some of the quad laser turrets were also removed. The criminal as Morrigan would use the C-ROC variant of the Gazanti to smuggle everything from generators to puffer pigs, which actually sound absolutely delicious. The Black Suns also used the modified Gozanti Class cruiser as sort of a troop carrier. They famously provided muscle for most of the underworld, and their ships were very easy to recognize and painted in black with gold highlights. You also had ships like the Krait's Honor, which was equipped with turbo lasers, extra laser turrets, an additional proton torpedo launcher, upgraded sublight engines, and a military-grade deflector shield. This is probably one of the most overpowered Gozanti Class cruisers around. It was owned by Keldor Seco Voss and used to protect smaller merchant ship companies in the Outer Rim from pirates hired by the Trade Federation. They were trying to monopolize the free trade zone at the time. It's not surprising then that the C-ROC variant of the Gozanti Class cruiser would be used extensively by Confederate privateers. Privateers were essentially pirates that were commissioned by the Confederacy of Independent Systems to basically attack Republic trade routes. This same cruiser, ironically, was also used by the other side of the war as well, and also neutral factions as an escort vessel for transport ships. Basically, if you saw a Gozanti Class cruiser during the Clone Wars, it's very possible it could be an enemy, a friend, or just some random. These ships were everywhere, especially in the trade routes. Other than as privateers, the Separatists would mainly use the Gozanti Class cruiser as support ships for their fleets. These could be identified by the Separatist markings on their hull. The Republic, on the other hand, had been using the Gozanti Class cruiser ever since it rolled off the assembly line. It was initially designed for the Republic Judicial Forces, a paramilitary force that functioned sort of like the federal police. Also, in the first few months of the Clone Wars, before the Venator-class Star Destroyer was in operation, basically the Gozanti Class cruiser had to fill in as a capital ship. Also, for safe and secure travel across war zones, the Gozanti Class cruiser gives refugees and vacationers alike a peace of mind they just couldn't have on other types of transports. Now, for a fan like me, I most associate the Gozanti Class cruiser with the Empire period, and that's especially because I really enjoyed the Rebels TV show. The Gozanti Class cruiser is present in many of the show's episodes and was a mainstay in the Imperial military, especially in the Outer Rim territories where the populations were so sparse and spread out that deploying an Imperial Star Destroyer just made no sense. But actually, during the early Empire period, the Gozanti Class cruiser was in danger of being phased out. And that's because there were some really toxic mentalities in the Empire at the time. Wilhelm Tarkin had the Emperor convinced that size mattered, and the larger the ship, the better it would be at peacekeeping, or something idiotic like that. The reality was the Gozanti Class cruiser was the perfect size for the outer edges of the Galactic Empire, and it could keep these regions secure and stable at a fraction of the cost of even a Arcadian light Imperial cruiser. The Empire had their own special type of Gozanti Class cruiser known as the TIE Carrier variant, where the C-ROC had exterior hardpoints for large freight containers. The Imperial version had 4 hardpoints for TIE fighters. This greatly extended the range of the TIE fighters on board, which lacked a hyperdrive and also life support. At the same time, it greatly increased the offensive and defensive capabilities of a Gozanti Class cruiser. These ships could easily hold their own against pirates and bandits, and only a very determined and hardened rebel unit could easily destroy one of these ships. The Gazanti Class assault carrier was another variant used by the Empire. Instead of having hardpoints for TIE fighters, these ships could carry 2 all-terrain armored transports, or 4 all-terrain scout transports, or 4 all-terrain defense pods, and still have room to carry a dozen or so Wookiee slaves in the hold. This ship could do it all for the Empire. The last Imperial variant we'll be taking a look at is the IG-V55 surveillance vessel, or Imperial listener ship. This specialized Gozanti Class cruiser was utilized by the Imperial Intelligence Information Office to monitor communications. The ship was equipped with multiple sensors and had an operations center aboard commanded by a group of Imperial intelligence officers with cybernetic implants which helped them shift through data. The Rebel Alliance would actually use the Gozanti Class cruiser as well as mainly an escort ship, and when times got hard, as a capital ship. These were heavily upgraded Gozanti Class cruisers that were probably very similar in design and modification to the ones used by privateers during the Clone Wars. Even during the Cold War and the First Order Resistance War, you still had Gozanti armed traders fighting all across the galaxy, usually used by civilians. These were pretty basic Gozanti Class cruisers upgraded with a few military components like extra shields or turrets. The Gozanti Class cruiser reminds us that it's not always about the quality of the ship, it's about how easy and economical a ship can be. In many ways, the Gozanti Class cruiser is like the Honda Civic or Sherman tank of Star Wars because it's so easy to use and so functional that everyone uses it. And so without this ship, who knows what would have happened. Anyway, let me know in the comment section below what you think about this. We'll do some more in-depth coverage of some of the more unique ships, in my opinion, that don't get enough love in the Star Wars universe. Let me know what you guys think about that. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.